Rorexo for 89 died mindles. And yes, it is hard to know that sometimes politics comes in the way of friendships, and I think JD made this clear in his own response. It is hurtful and it is sad, and Usha Vance has always blended in with the crowd. In fact, she will have it no other way. Her sharp legal mind was her biggest asset until she crossed paths with JD Vance, now tired of living behind the curtain. She takes center stage as she talks about what being by JD's side truly means. What sacrifices did Usha make to protect her husband's ambitions? How will this revelation affect them politically? Join us as Usha Vance finally breaks her silence, revealing what no one expected: weight of silence on a cold January morning in 2025 as the winter sun stretched across the Capitol steps. Usha Vance stood gracefully in a deep blue silk. Sorry. Her presence at the inauguration wasn't just for show. It was proof of years of quiet sacrifices and careful choices. Behind her calm smile was the story of a woman who gave up a fast-rising legal career for the unpredictable world of politics. At 39 years of age, Usha's path from Yale Law School to becoming America's first Hindu second lady was one few would have expected. Usha, the daughter of Indian immigrants who made a home in California, built a strong career at Munger Tolls and Olin, focusing on tough civil cases. Her colleagues saw her as a brilliant lawyer who didn't lose a case in her first 3 years. But when JD's political career took off, she had to make a decision that would change her life. Maria Rodriguez, who had worked closely with Usha as a law partner, shared that the hardest part wasn't just leaving the firm. It was saying goodbye to cases she had dedicated so much time and effort to. These weren't just any cases. They were issues she deeply believed in and had spent years working on. One of those cases, in particular, stood out to her. It was about protecting the voting rights of minorities in rural areas, a cause Usha had always been passionate about, especially since her time clerking for Chief Justice Roberts. It wasn't easy for either of them to walk away from something so important, but they both understood the bigger picture of what was to come. Going from a respected lawyer to a political spouse wasn't easy. Usha had to balance the expectations of her Indian heritage with the traditions of American politics. She found ways to mix her vegetarian Hindu lifestyle with Ohio's meat and potatoes culture at campaign events. She learned how to be visible but not outspoken, and supportive but still her own person. Her sacrifices went beyond her career as JD's political career grew. So did the public attention. Every appearance, outfit, and word was closely watched when right-wing critics attacked their interracial marriage. Usha stayed quiet and held her head high. Instead of focusing on the noise, she focused on raising their 3 children, teaching them to embrace both their Hindu and Catholic backgrounds. The pressure grew even more when JD became Trump's running mate. Usha's background in progressive law didn't always align with the administration's views on diversity, views she had once worked hard to support, but she handled these challenges with surprising grace at private events. Staff members noticed how Usha would cleverly avoid questions about policy disagreements by shifting the conversation to things they could all agree on. She made her home a place where different worlds came together, hosting dinners where Indian dishes were mixed with classic Midwestern comfort food. The toll of balancing everything became clear in small ways one would miss without paying close attention. Friends noticed she wasn't attending the legal conferences she used to attend. Her name was missing from the pro bono cases she had once supported. The sharp legal mind who had argued in federal courts now thought carefully before making any public comments. Even though she stayed quiet, still made an impact behind the scenes. She helped JD prepare for debates, shaped his message, and reached out to new communities. Her Harvard Law Review articles once about constitutional law shifted to focus on political communication and public service as Usha steps into her role as Second Lady. It is no surprise that people are even more curious about her. The wife of Donald Trump's running mate, JDB, is all set to become the first Indian-origin Second Lady of the United States. They are curious about what her silence might reveal. Will she speak up for the immigrant experience in American politics? How will she balance her progressive legal background with the administration's policies? Her answers could not only change her own story, but also how America views political partnerships today. Day in Washington. People often say, the quietest voices are the most powerful. Usha Vance's silence says a lot. about the cost of power and the tricky balance between personal beliefs and political needs, while Usha Vance's quiet sacrifices showed one side of their story. JD's troubled past holds its own powerful story of survival. But what struggles did the future vice president face before he could stand firm in America's halls of power, rising from the ashes in the rundown parts of Middletown, Ohio, where factory smokestacks stretched into the gray sky? Young JD Vance learned early about survival. It was 1994, and at just 10 years old, he sat scared, in the back of a police car, watching his mom get handcuffed after threatening to take their lives in a drug-fueled outburst. The police car became a strange sense of comfort for him, a brief moment of calm in the chaos of his childhood. Outside, the streets that had once been full of hardworking steelworkers now felt empty, echoing with lost dreams and addiction. His mom, who had once been a nursing student with a bright future, had fallen into heroin addiction, leaving JD to deal with empty fridges, late-night disappearances, and broken promises. His sister Lindsay, who was 4 years older than him and had wisdom that seemed beyond her years, quickly became his first protector when their mom forgot to buy groceries. Lindsay would sneak him food, ensuring he didn't go hungry. She'd help him with his homework, even though she juggled her responsibilities between shifts at the local diner. Lindsay didn't just care for him in the small ways, she was also there to shield him from the troubled men who drifted in and out of their lives, like shadows never sticking around for long, but always leaving a mark through it all. Lindsay was the steady presence he could rely on. But it was his grandmother M who would really change his life. A formidable woman who kept a .44 Magnum by her bed and swore like a sailor. She gave him more than just a roof over his head. She gave him stability. Her voice, full of grit and cigarette smoke, would always say to him he was not going to end up like them. Her small house on Central Avenue became JD's safe place where doing homework was a must, and excuses didn't fly in that house with Mama's strict rules and home-cooked meals. JD started to imagine a different future. He began reading a lot, devouring books about history and politics, while his friends played video games. His grades got better, but the shame of his past stayed with him. Like a constant shadow at school, he got really good at making up stories about why his mom never showed up to parent-teacher conferences. The Marines gave him his first real way out at 19. He left the familiar struggles of Middletown for the strict discipline of boot camp. The military gave him more than just a path. It gave him a new kind of family, one focused on shared goals instead of shared pain during his 4 years of service, including a time in Iraq where he worked in public affairs for the Corps. JD learned lessons about leadership and strength that no classroom could ever teach. When JD arrived at Ohio State University after leaving the Marines, the difference between his past and present was clear as day. While most of the other students his age were focused on dating, partying, and enjoying the college experience, JD was still in survival mode. He had to work multiple jobs just to pay his bills, constantly haunted by the memories of those tough times when money was tight. Despite all that, JD thrived. He worked hard, stayed focused, and ended up finishing his political science degree in less than 2 years, proving that even when the odds were stacked against him, he could push through and succeed. Yale Law School felt like an impossible dream until it didn't. The same drive that helped him survive his tough childhood pushed him through the prestigious halls where future presidents and Supreme Court justices had studied. But even as he sat in constitutional law classes wearing old suits and studying late into the night, he could still hear the echoes of Middletown sirens in his mind. JD's story could have been just another escape from poverty, but he took a different route. Instead of hiding his past, he began to see it as a way to understand America's bigger problems. His experiences became a bridge between two worlds, the tough streets of his childhood and the polished halls of power he now walked through. Everything, the lessons from his early years, stuck with him. Survival isn't just about getting away, it's about remembering where you came from and understanding why you had to leave, while JD's tough past helped build his resilience. It was at Yale where fate stepped in, bringing a meeting that would change everything he thought he knew about love and belonging. But how did a self-described hillbilly and a sharp Indian-American lawyer law connect across such different worlds when two worlds collided in Yale Law School's classroom 127, where future legal giants sharpened their skills? JD Vance sat in his old blazer, feeling out of place among the polished students. Then Usha Chilukuri raised her hand and everything changed. Their first meeting in Professor Amy Cha's constitutional law class formed an unexpected connection. Usha, the daughter of successful Indian immigrant doctors from California, carried herself with confidence. And a sharp mind, JD, still dealing with the baggage of his Appalachian past, was drawn to her boldness and the way she challenged traditional ideas during study sessions in Sterling Library's quiet corners. Their conversations showed some surprising similarities. Usha talked about her grandfather, who fought against caste discrimination in India, to become a respected teacher. JD shared stories of Mama's determined fight to give him a better life in Middletown. Both of them understood the pressure of family expectations and the drive to succeed. Their early days of dating took place at Yale with its long history. They shared their first kiss on the steps of Sterling Memorial Library, debated constitutional theory over coffee at Book Trader Cafe, and bonded over their shared passion for public service law. However, their different cultures created some challenges they had to work through. When JD had his first dinner with Usha's family in San Diego, he was a little out of his element. The spices were new to him, and some of the customs were different than anything he had experienced before. Usha's parents were warm and welcoming, but JD could tell they had some quiet concerns about her dating someone from such a different background. It wasn't anything they said outright, but he could sense it on the other hand. Back in Ohio, JD found himself wondering the same thing about his own family. He knew they were close-knit, and he wasn't sure how they would react to someone so different from the people they were used to. It was a new kind of challenge for both of them, navigating these different worlds and wondering how their families would accept their relationship. The turning point came in 2013 when they organized a discussion group called Social Decline in White America. It became a way for them to explore and bridge cultural gaps. Usha shared her thoughts on immigrant success stories, while JD brought in honest reflections from his own childhood. Their different viewpoints made for a deeper conversation that drew in students from all walks of life at Yale. Their relationship grew stronger as they faced challenges together when JD battled feelings of not fitting in during important job interviews. Usha helped him refine his presentation while making sure he stayed true to himself when she dealt with discrimination in the legal world. He stood by her, always ready to support her. Their 2014 wedding in Kentucky was a beautiful mix of different cultures. Hindu priests in bright orange robes stood next to Baptist ministers in dark suits, curry dishes sat next to bourbon-glazed ham on the tables, Bhangra dancers moved to the beat alongside bluegrass musicians. The ceremony blended Sanskrit prayers with Bible readings, creating something unique from both old traditions. Over the years, their home became a mix of different cultures. Usha showed JD how to cook vegetarian meals and practice meditation. He taught her about Appalachian storytelling and country music. Their kids grew up listening to bedtime stories that combined Hindu myths with country wisdom, but their biggest achievement wasn't just in overcoming their own differences. Their love proved that love can go beyond social boundaries. Their story broke down stereotypes about interracial marriage and challenged assumptions about red state values now at Yale. Where it all began, their journey is taught as an example of how American identity is always changing and growing, even though their love story brought together different cultures at Yale. JD and Usha's real relationship would face its biggest challenge in the harsh world of national politics. But could their carefully built bond of cultural understanding withstand the growing political divisions in America? Love in political crossfire. The bright lights of TV cameras at campaign events put a spotlight on JD and Usha Vance's relationship, exposing cracks that Yale had once kept hidden as Jay gained fame in conservative politics. Their marriage became a target for harsh critics from all sides. Nick Fuentes, a far-right figure with white nationalist views, was the first to publicly attack his comments filled with racial hatred, questioned JD's loyalty to conservative values just because of who he married. It was a bitter irony for many. JD, who had written passionately about working-class values, now had to defend his family from the very groups his political allies sometimes supported at home in Cincinnati. Things were tense behind closed doors. Usha's colleagues at Munger, Tolles and Olson began to worry as their once promising lawyer faced tough challenges all alone. Her work on diversity cases seemed to clash with her husband's public position against DI programs at a tense campaign rally in rural Ohio where Make America Great Again flags waved next to anti-immigration banners. Usha kept up her usual smile, but those who knew them well could see the difference. Her handheld JDs were a bit more tightly, and her usual confident walk seemed slower, more careful as JD's political career took off. The contradictions kept adding up at fundraising dinners. Usha would smoothly dodge questions about Trump's immigration policies that could have stopped her own parents from coming to America years ago. She'd served traditional Indian food to conservative donors who cheered speeches about protecting American culture. Their children found themselves caught in the middle of this cultural battle at school events. Other parents whispered about their mixed heritage. Conservative media picked apart family photos looking for signs of what they called cultural compromise. Meanwhile, liberal critics wondered how Usha could stay with a man whose policies they saw as against immigrants. The 2024 Republican National Convention turned up the heat on these tensions as Usha stepped onto the stage to introduce her husband. Protesters outside carried signs calling for racial purity inside. She spoke about their love story about JD learning to cook curry, while delegates who had just cheered speeches about mass deportation sat uncomfortably silent. Social media amplified every contradiction when JD defended Trump's questioning of Kamala Harris's racial identity, calling her a chameleon as a father of 3 biracial children. Did those comment give you pause at all? They don't give me pause at all. Look, all he said is that Kamala Harris critics pointed out that his children shared a similar mixed heritage. He responded that his wife was tough enough to handle it, which started another debate about the personal cost of political ambition. Despite everything their relationship held strong at home, they created a safe space away from all the political chaos. JD still cooked the Indian dishes his mother and in-law had taught him. Usha kept up with her Hindu traditions while supporting JD's Catholic beliefs. Their kids grew up learning how to embrace both sides of their heritage with pride and confidence. But in political circles, people still wondered about the lasting effects of all this pressure. Some questioned whether their love story, once seen as a symbol of America's diversity, might eventually turn into a warning about the personal sacrifice politics can demand as they face the future together. JD and Usha Vance's relationship takes on a new narrative. It is now more than just a marriage. It shows the ongoing struggle in America with identity power and what unity and diversity really means. As their marriage withstood the pressure of political attention, that was not the end. JD and Usha Vance will face their biggest challenge yet. As they step onto the national stage, would their strength be enough to handle the weight of making history from Yale dreams to Washington's power circle? January 2025. The steps of the Capitol building saw a moment in American history like no other. While Donald Trump's return to power grabbed the world's attention, it was the people standing just to his left who showed the bigger changes taking place. Place in Washington, JD Vance. The boy who once saw his mother get handcuffed in Middletown, Ohio, raised his right hand to take the vice presidential oath. Next to him stood Usha, wearing a navy silk sari that stood out against Washington's cold winter backdrop. The moment held a deeper meaning that even their biggest critics couldn't overlook. The road to this moment started months earlier during a vice presidential debate that changed how people saw him in a wood panel auditorium at the University of Virginia. JD faced his Democratic opponent with Usha's well-thought-out strategies in his head. They spent hours preparing for their Cincinnati study, fine-tuning every response and gesture. Later, the New York Times would praise her legal expertise for his strong performance behind the scenes. Their rise sparked a lot of talk about what it means to be American conservative radio hosts who once criticized their marriage, now praise their traditional family values. Meanwhile, liberal commentators who disagreed with JD's politics still had to acknowledge how historic it was for Usha to become the first Hindu Indian-American second lady. Being in Washington's inner circles brought some quiet but important changes at state dinners. Vegetarian dishes became a regular. Choice the Naval Observatory, their official home, celebrated its first